ATP, what it do with your boy Clayton Rain? Yeah, I'm back at it again, back at you guys with another one. Wanted to share some thoughts on this David Benavidez, Dmitry Bivol, Samson Lukowicz, and Turkey Al-Sheikh love triangle situation that seems to be developing slowly but surely, running into an area where there's some conflict of interest. And I thought I'd share some perspective on it, right? Follow me for a second down memory lane as we remember David Benavidez being at 168 pounds, um, having a tribulated journey to say the least, going from becoming an actual champion to losing his belt due to outside recreational activities, gaining it back, losing it again on the scale, right? And then ultimately getting put in a position where Canelo Alvarez is in the division and collecting all these belts, and ultimately ends up unifying and becoming an undisputed champion at 168 pounds. David Benavidez works his way through the fights, through the rankings, to become a WBC interim title holder, and ultimately what a lot of people perceived as a mandatory for Canelo Alvarez, and probably the biggest threat to Canelo Alvarez's position as an undisputed champion, but was unable to ever actually get any of the sanctioning bodies, in specific the WBC sanctioning body, headed by Mauricio Suleiman, to actually hold Canelo Alvarez to task and force him to either vacate the WBC title or go ahead and defend the title against David Benavidez. We all are very familiar with this story and with this journey. If you're watching boxing and truly a fan of the sport, that's probably one of the most anticipated fights, one of the biggest fights that could be made in boxing, even to this day, may be David Benavidez versus Canelo Alvarez. Now we're getting closer to this present moment right now. Let's just go ahead and stay in the memory lane just for one more second or a minute and remember when David Benavidez ultimately had to concede to the idea that he would not be able to get this fight with Canelo Alvarez, that in fact he may be absolutely wasting his time chasing Canelo Alvarez around, and he might have to go chase his own legacy somewhere else. So what does David Benavidez do? David Benavidez moves up to the light heavyweight division, right? He moves up to the light heavyweight division and gets an opportunity to fight for another interim title, a WBC interim title again against Alexander Vosdik, a fight where David Benavidez went into the fight with pre-existing injuries and issues that forced him to not maybe give his best performance, and a performance that a lot of boxing pundits across the space and fans across the space said exposed David Benavidez to a certain degree, but he was able to weather that storm and ultimately beat Alexander Vosdik in a decision. Keep in mind, Alexander Vosdik was a fighter who only had lost prior to this fight with David Benavidez to the actual soon to be at that point undisputed light heavyweight champion of the world, Artur Beterbiev, right? So he came in with a good resume, right? This was a big guy for David Benavidez to take on a light heavyweight division for his debut in the light heavyweight division. And when you put that all into perspective, he performed pretty well when you have hindsight and you look at the situation as far as injuries to his hand, healing scar tissue over his eye that he had cut his eye during training camp, and a couple of other things that were there, right? But respectfully, giving David Benavidez all the respect in the world, because at the end of the day, what a journey, what a warrior mentality he had, and you had to respect it. So what was going to be the next step for David Benavidez at that point? Because he was actually confronted by an ultimatum by the WBC at that time that Mauricio Suleiman put out there, that he was going to get 10 days at the time to make a decision as to whether or not he was going to continue campaigning at 175 pounds, or if he in fact would return to 168 pounds to get back into the conversation of being a mandatory and chasing the Canelo Alvarez not only payday but legacy fight that he so was committed to getting. Well, David Benavidez didn't deal well deal well with the, excuse me, did not deal well with the ultimatum, as he found himself saying, "You know what? I'm going to go ahead and make my own path, and I'm going to go ahead and make my own legacy. I'm going to stay at 175. I'm going to push, because Turkey Al-Sheikh at the time had assured David Benavidez that, listen, I'm going to put you in position." Now, we can go back a little further here and remember when actually David Benavidez actually had put out a message to Turkey Al-Sheikh, and I'm not going to say he begged him, but he asked him passionately and said, "Listen, if you might consider, Canelo Alvarez is asking for anywhere between 150 to 200 million dollars to want to fight me. He feels like the reward needs to be that high for a fighter who hasn't accomplished anything." And asked Turkey Al-Sheikh if he'd be willing to foot the bill, being that Turkey Al-Sheikh has earned himself a reputation as an investor in the sport, a passionate fan and pundit of the sport that, you know, arguably has been willing to spend endless amounts of money to get the biggest fights that he can get, right? Turkey Al-Sheikh said, "Listen, I'm not really interested in that fight. That's not a fight I'm interested in paying this high of a price for. But here's what I can do. Come up to the light heavyweight division, a division that I'm currently working on unifying and having an undisputed champion there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put you in position to go ahead and fight for an interim WBC title. If you grab that, win that fight, winner of that fight will be next in line to ultimately fight against the winner between Artur Beterbiev and Dmitry Bivol to become an undisputed light heavyweight champion of the world." Well, this aligned with everything that David Benavidez wanted to accomplish in that present moment, which was to show the world that, you know, his legacy was defined in the fact that he was a champion, an undisputed champion, and he never strayed away or walked away from any challenge that was in front of him. He thought this was important, and I think most people who are fans of David Benavidez have always appreciated and respected that aspect of his what's the best word to describe it, the best aspect of his character, right? This is what most of his fans are probably the biggest fans of when it comes to David Benavidez. So David Benavidez defeats Alexander Vosdik, and ultimately, in the next fight coming up, David Benavidez has an opportunity to either fight Jesse Hart or David Morrell. You know what? Let me take a step back. David Benavidez actually communicated to the boxing space. If we're going to be exact and correct about it, he actually communicated to the boxing space that he was actually reaching out and was going to make the biggest fight possible with which at the time was David Morrell, who at the same time as David Benavidez moving up to light heavyweight, David Morrell also decided to do that. And what happened? To David Benavidez's surprise, the PBC or Samson Leakowitz, or a combination of them both, had already reached out to Jesse Hart at the time for David Benavidez's second fight in the light heavyweight division. Well, David Benavidez had to go ahead and retract that statement, accept the fact that his handlers put him in a different position, and that in fact David Morrell and him would have to wait for a fight in the near future, as his priority and what was in his crosshairs at the time and on his table was actually Jesse Hart. Well, after maybe from the outside looking in, what looked like to be after some real good thought, David Benavidez said to himself, "This is unacceptable. We're not going to go ahead and do that. No, I'm going to reach out to my management. I'm assuming Samson Leakowitz, and let them know that I'm not interested in that Jesse Hart fight. At this point in my career, I'm looking for a fight that makes more sense, that's significant, that's challenging, and that shows my fan base and the rest of the boxing space who I really am." So he scratched that Jesse Hart fight and put his feelers out there to go ahead and reach out to David Morrell to make the fight that we all saw at the beginning of this year. A fight that had the whole entire boxing space shaken up and excited, because we love to see when fighters take their careers in their own hands, push against the actual machine and say, "I know you guys think you want to move me a certain way based on how much money we can make, um based on the bottom line, which is the dollars and the cost of these fights. But that's not how my career is going to go. We're actually going to move in a different direction. We're going to figure this out. We're going to make this fight happen with David Morrell, and the boxing space, including yours truly, was excited to say the least, right? Probably an underrated statement to say it was exciting to see, because rarely today do you see these fighters in their primes fighting each other at the right time. And if you guys watch my content, you know how I talk about timing, meaning everything in these fights happening. These fights need to happen, but they need to happen at the right time for them to have the proper impact, and for us, the fans, to get the best version of these fighters in the ring with each other to ultimately find out who the best is. Hence, the best fighting the best. And it's an important thing. And David Benavidez checked the box in that situation, fought David Morrell on a pay-per-view event, his own event that he headlined, and in a great 12-round bout was able to walk away with a with the head nod, with the decision over David Morrell. And of course, he didn't have to make that fight happen. Just by beating Alexander Voznik, he was in the conversation and in the race to fight against the winner between Dmitry Bivol and Artur Beterbiev. Now we're getting closer to the present moment, where we've seen the first fight between Artur Beterbiev and Dmitry Bivol ending in a decision that went to Artur Beterbiev, made him the light heavyweight champion. The fight was so close that Turki Al-Sheikh said, listen, I want to make a sequel to this fight. Let's have a rematch. And depending on how the fight goes, we'll discuss as to whether or not this is going to be a trilogy. Well, in the meantime, David Benavidez, coming off of a win with David Morrell, is confronted with the reality that he's finally in position now to actually fight for not only one title, but 4 titles. And he actually gets a chance to become an undisputed champion in the 4-belt era. This on the back end of a crazy, long, frustrating journey on trying to get a fight with Canelo Alvarez, a pound-for-pound face of boxing at that time, to make himself an undisputed champion. Well, now here he is at 175 pounds. He gets an opportunity to fight the winner between Dmitry Bivol and Artur Beterbiev, and more importantly, may get a chance to fight a common opponent with Canelo Alvarez, but not any common opponent, as he did fight Caleb Plant. Canelo Alvarez fought Caleb Plant, but for him to actually fight Dmitry Bivol, a fighter who beat Canelo Alvarez, and on top of that, become a undisputed champion. Now, guys, I'm trying to take my time and tell you guys this and bring this full circle so we can get some understanding of what's happened and try to make out what's happening in a present moment here and see how we can make this make sense, right? Because in the midst of all of this happening, Canelo Alvarez has a fight with Edgar Berlanga, but immediately after Edgar Berlanga ends up in Saudi Arabia negotiating with Turki Al-Sheikh to what we come to find out in the present moment was a 4-5 fight multi-million-dollar deal with Turki Al-Sheikh. So now Turki Al-Sheikh has the undisputed light heavyweight championships under his belt, and now he has the pound-for-pound face of boxing in Canelo Alvarez, a fight that David Benavidez has been trying to get his hands around for the longest amount of time. He has him now on a 4-5 fight deal, and Turki Al-Sheikh has personally at this point invited David Benavidez out to Saudi Arabia. Why? Well, you guys know how Turki does at this point, and if you don't, you must be under a rock somewhere. If Turki's inviting a fighter out to Saudi Arabia 9 out of 10 times, there's some serious business that's probably going to be getting spoken about. Usually ends up being a huge opportunity for the fighter, maybe even a multi-fight deal. We saw him doing with Tio. We saw him do it with Ryan. We saw him do it with Devin. And of course, as I said earlier, we saw him do it with Canelo Alvarez. So now we're getting closer and closer to the present moment, because David Benavidez has agreed to make his way to Saudi Arabia to see what Turki has to offer him, to watch at the same time to watch Dmitry Bivol and Artur Beterbiev fight for their rematch. And knowing that depending on how this fight goes, he may be next in line literally, or maybe waiting for a trilogy. If Bivol wins this fight and it's a close fight, naturally you would think that Beterbiev, who's given Dmitry Bivol an opportunity at redemption with a rematch, that he would obviously be getting the favor returned to him and being offered a rematch if in fact Dmitry Bivol were to win that fight, which we know today is exactly what happened. David Benavidez acknowledged this in interviews before and said, listen, I understand that if Dmitry Bivol wins this fight, which by the way, David Benavidez favored Dmitry Bivol to win the fight, said that he felt like he won the first fight. said, listen, naturally, I would have to be patient, step to the side, allow them to run that trilogy. And I don't know what maybe I would take a Caleb Smith fight. Well, we also come to find out that while he was down there in Saudi Arabia, according to Samson Leakowitz, that David Benavidez was offered a lucrative fight against Caleb Smith, who had a great victory over Joshua Buatsi that made himself an interim, I believe, WBO title holder, right? Keep in mind that David Benavidez is now a unified interim champion, holding a WBC title and an interim WBC title and a regular WBA title. Now getting the opportunity to fight Caleb Smith for an interim WBO title for a lucrative amount of money. But more importantly, rumor has it that this fight would be on the undercard of a trilogy fight between Dmitry Bivol and Artur Beterbiev. And ultimately, the winner between him and Caleb Smith would naturally be in line and be the one to get the fight against Dmitry Bivol or Artur Beterbiev, whoever the winner is, getting an opportunity to become an undisputed champion. In the midst of this happening and him being down there in Saudi Arabia, David Benavidez abruptly gets up and leaves Saudi Arabia. We come to find out weeks later that Samson Leakowitz, there was some confusion or miscommunication, according to what he said, about what David Benavidez was out there to do. And although Turki Al-Sheikh did make a lucrative offer, that they weren't interested in taking that offer, David Benavidez wants to fight in the States. And in fact, somehow Mauricio Suleiman ends up on the same page with them and decides to actually enforce a mandatory with the WBC. Yes, you heard it correctly. I know that might sound crazy because how often is the WBC actually doing these type of things, being that they just ran David Benavidez in circles while he was at 168 and never enforced the mandatory on Canelo Alvarez. But I digress to say that Mauricio Suleiman said, we'll go ahead, we'll activate, we'll tell Dmitry Bivol that we're ordering this fight to happen. And if it doesn't happen, in turn, Dmitry Bivol would have to go ahead and vacate or be stripped of the WBC title he holds. Well, this put unnecessary pressure on the Dmitry Bivol or to a better BF fight, potentially, being that now undisputed wouldn't be on the line in the trilogy, and also put David Benavidez in a position to where one might argue he was going to force Dmitry Bivol to concede to his terms, as David Benavidez and Samson Leakowitz were going to force and push the terms and the conditions and dictate the terms as to how this fight was going to happen, even though Dmitry Bivol was the undisputed champion. Or maybe Dmitry Bivol would go ahead and vacate that WBC title and say, listen, I'm already been undisputed, or Artur Beterbiev's already been undisputed. Our trilogy doesn't really need undisputed on it to make it a great fight. Maybe Dmitry Bivol might go ahead and vacate that belt, which in turn would upgrade David Benavidez up to a full WBC champion, but as we all know, an email champion. Not the same as fighting and defeating the actual champion and beating the man who, in this case as well, beat the man. So here we are today now, where it looks like Samson Leakowitz and David Benavidez has come to a conclusion that an email champion is their best bet and best option. Does it make sense to you guys? Does it make sense that David Benavidez would actually choose to be upgraded to a champion rather than fight not only fight to become an undisputed champion, right? Keep in mind that he's forfeiting the opportunity at the other three belts to be upgraded with one belt with the WBC. And not only that, but also beat the man who beat the man that he was trying to fight, killing multiple birds with one stone and maybe inching himself that much closer to actually getting a fight with Canelo Alvarez on his terms and on the light heavyweight division, as David Benavidez, upon the back end of a victory and him becoming an undisputed light heavyweight champion, would be considered, at least in front of Turkey, the person who's paying this, an A-sider, right, to the negotiations. And ultimately, the amount of money he's passed by at the same time, moving away from this situation to do what? To be upgraded to a WBC champion. And what fights exactly are Samson Leakowitz or the PBC going to facilitate for David Benavidez at light heavyweight, and something that would actually be worth the kind of money that David Benavidez is actually worth being paid. I've said a lot, guys, right? I broke it down a little bit and kind of built this story up a little and spoke on it in a way that I felt like would be the clearest, most transparent way to watch and see this. If you disagree, feel free to put it in the comments if there's something that I missed. I'll add this and say that hindsight says that maybe Samson Leakowitz didn't exhaust all the avenues on making that fight with Canelo Alvarez happen, as we come to find out that maybe there wasn't an actual mandatory that was activated or pushed to be activated that would put David Benavidez in the same situation he's in right now, where Canelo Alvarez would have either had to defend that WBC title or risk losing it and upgrading David Benavidez to a full WBC 168-pound super middleweight champion. From what you're hearing through the grapevine is that never happened. And here we are at light heavyweight again, where David Benavidez is this close to doing something remarkable for his legacy, beat the fighter who is arguably one of the pound for pound best fighters in the world, being undisputed, fast track to becoming an undisputed light heavyweight champion, and also getting one of the biggest paydays, if not the biggest paydays he could get, fighting for that accolade. To me, from the outside looking in, the question has to be Samson Leakowitz, David Benavidez. What exactly is the end game? And where exactly are we going with this as far as this benefiting David Benavidez? As from the outside looking in, it almost looks like David Benavidez and Samson Leakowitz have frozen themselves out of the actual top tier light heavyweight division conversations as far as champions are concerned, and that David Benavidez is going to be campaigning and defending an WBC title that he was upgraded to, emailed to, and that he's missing out on the opportunity to actually have a real fight with Dimitri Bivol that gets him an opportunity to become a light heavyweight undisputed champion, not just a WBC champion. And my question is, what's the end game? Once we get past all the silliness of it all, does David Benavidez benefit from this move he's making, or is he actually taking two more steps backwards and putting himself into the same situation he was in with Canelo Alvarez? Being that now he'll be a champion, he can't even be pushing a mandatory position. He can't even push that type of narrative, because as a champion, you're not even eligible to be ranked in the other sanctioning bodies so that you can force some sort of mandatory. At least for now, right? As the rules historically in this game have changed for the right people, for the right time, for the right money, and the right opportunity, right? You guys let me know what you think in the comment section. David Benavidez from the outside looking in, is he tricking himself out of the position he's in? Is this what he really wants? Or is this the handlers, once again, the Samson Leakowitzes of the community, the Al Heyman or PBC representation of the community that seem to once again have David Benavidez in a situation where he's compromised his opportunity, the integrity of the opportunity that was really there in front of him, and that he's just going to be upgraded to an email champion? I don't know, man. It is what it is. It's your boy Claymore Rain, guys. Thank you for taking the time to listen into this and following the content. If this is your first time tapping in, please take a moment to hit the like button, number one. It helps the algorithm so other people can catch this content. Also, hit the subscribe button and the notification button next to the subscribe button so you are getting notified when I'm dropping content like this. It is your boy Claymore Rain. It's the ATP Combat Media Show. Let me know what you think. Until the next one, guys, at this point, we out.